Greetings and salutations, friends of Goochland. Today I want to talk about generators. Generators. Because we're probably going to have 300 or 400, 500 of them here in our part of the county, and I'm sure that they're probably going to grow out to the west to right along Broad Street. So I've got some info for you. I've also, stick around because at the end, or you can skip forward if you'd like, I've got some info on a Farm Bureau informational meeting on the Joshua Falls to Yeet transmission line project and what the Farm Bureau is thinking about it. Well, back to generators. I'm going to put some of these stats on the screen because they're very staggering, actually. There are over 12,000 generators in Virginia now. Over 12,000. There's more generators in Virginia than there are McDonald's, if you can imagine that. The majority of them, the vast majority, about not quite 9,000 of them are what's called Tier 2 generators. And Tier 2 generators are for emergency use only. And they have a lot of pollutants, and they're loud, and that's why there are limitations, and I'll talk about them. And then there are the newer ones, the Tier 4 generators, and they put out, over a period of time, measured equally, they'll put out the same, or they'll put out a much lower amount of pollution and noise than a Tier 2 generator. But the deal with them is they can be run 24/7, all day and all night long. Starting on July 1st of this year, only Tier 4 generators will be allowed in Virginia, a new statute. There's good and bad to that. I'll talk about that in a little bit. Well, one of the generators used, that's a question I get quite often, and I've heard a variety of things from every day to once a month or so. So what I found out is, for the most part, now this is regulated by community, but for the most part, they're run for 30 minutes once a month. And then once a year for an extended test for 90 minutes. And of course, if they have maintenance, they'll have their own. So you say, well, that's not too bad. 30 minutes a month, but times 500. What's the math on that? 15,000 hours of pollutants going into the air in eastern Goochland, blowing to the north Hanover. Emergency use is whenever the grid goes down. And most data centers report that they've had 0 to 2 over the last 2 years. So it's actually very rare. They can be used in non-emergencies when the grid is strained, particularly during summer. That's when it happens. The grid gets strained because everybody comes home from work. You wash clothes, you turn your air conditioner down a little bit, you start cooking, and the power requirement goes up. And so PGM or Dominion can tell the data centers you need to go on demand power, you need to go on your generators. There could be planned grid outages. For instance, if they were going to build a new power line through Goochland County, they might have to take part of the existing one down, and that's when generators are also permitted. And short-term disturbances, they don't know why. We had an earthquake, a few years ago. That had probably been a good one. But this is the last one here is the most important, I think. And it's called bridging power. Bridge as in bridge over the River Kwai. Use of diesel generators as primary power for months or even years before being connected to the other power sources. So for instance, if some company wanted to build hypothetically a 900-acre hyperscale data center with 3 megawatt power requirement, they could fire up all those generators, and there'd be a bunch of them. I'll try and figure it out and put the number here. But each generator, which is about the size of a railroad car, bigger than a school bus, they'd be on all the time, day and night, 24/7, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. The air pollution is immense. Nitrous oxide and PM 2.5. And I'll probably do an episode once on PM 2.5 because it's pretty wicked stuff. And then there's the diesel fuel thing. I don't know how that's going to work out. These generators, if they get a Tier 4 generator, which they would have to get because of the statute, a Tier 4 generator burns at continuous power requirements about 160 gallons per hour. So whatever the math is, I'll do the math too. And if they're burning all the time, they're going to have lots of fuel trucks, or they're going to have a direct fuel line from a storage facility. We don't have any refineries around here, I don't think, but from a storage facility, which would have the big, huge pipelines direct from wherever, Gulf Coast. Many of the data centers have storage tanks, several tanks, of 1 million gallons of diesel fuel or more. Now, leaks are rare with those kind of things, but imagine a 1 million gallon tank. Actually, it's several tanks there. I don't know, 200,000. They're big tanks, but it's not one tank. But imagine a leak of one of those tanks with tens of thousands of gallons and what that's going to do to our aquifer. In Nova, just northern Virginia, there were 138 permitted sites for generators, and that included 7,338 generators in 138 permitted sites. 18.5 gigawatts. 18.5 gigawatts. VCU has done some studies on the pollution up there and the noise pollution, but most especially nitrous oxide and PM 2.5. And I'll see if I can't find a source and put the link in the remarks. I have a source. I didn't want to put any of their slides on there because I don't know what's copyrighted. But right now they have permitted 2,900 tons of carbon monoxide, 10,000 tons of nitrous oxide, and 1,200 tons of PM 2.5. Now, well, you say, well, that's just permitted. They're not on all the time. That brings up a couple of things. How much are they actually on? And the study included that. And why would we let that amount of tonnage go into our atmosphere in the first place? Why would we give permits for that? Smart people in Washington, D.C. and Richmond, I guess, but the actuals are averaging 6 to 10% of the permitted. Industry says, oh, no, we're not that high. We're only at 5%. There's a surprise. But some are much higher. Prince William County around Manassas, for instance, where there's a growing number of data centers, the percentage of permitted was 78% of carbon monoxide, 78% of nitrous oxide, and 76% of PM 2.5. I don't know how they get away with that. Arizona State University did a different kind of study. They looked at what happens to the air and ground around a data center campus. And they discovered that air-cooled condenser arrays in data centers around Phoenix created a thermal plume where temperatures went up between 1.3 and 4. And you say, oh yeah, it's already 110 out there. You know, that's not that bad. Well, it is. It creates a heat loop. Because what happens is the area around there, and it's up to, I can't remember how many miles away, but it's a mile away, say. What happens is the air actually is 14 degrees warmer inside the plume, and it raises the temperature around by that 1.3 to 4 degrees. The plume is actually 14 to 25 degrees hotter than the surrounding heat. So what do people do when it gets hotter? They turn their air conditioners up. And what does that do? It makes the air hotter around where the houses are. And what does that do? Well, that means that the data center is also getting hotter than normal. So they have to increase the load on the air conditioning, both in the houses and the data center, and it creates this unbelievable loop, heat loop. So that's a small, interesting thing. Dominion has contracts for 70 gigawatts for data centers, just for data centers. That's 50% of all the power required for Virginia. So what this has ended up in is growth in behind the meter systems. Behind the meter, in other words, Dominion doesn't get, they're not using Dominion energy, and so they have to create their own energy. Natural gas jet engine, natural gas turbines is one thing. Coal is being looked at. The current administration wants to fire the coal industry up again. It's pretty amazing. Empower Analytics studied the emission from Vantage 2 system data center campus in Sterling, and they're using 8 natural gas turbines, jet engines, and 51 diesel generators. Health damages, they exist. They've been documented, measured, and they're forecast for the coming years. These are significant. Estimates project that increased health costs are going to go up significantly in the next 5 years and are going to include 17 to 33 premature deaths. No, I've heard some of the political chatter about, well, we need data centers. We need data centers. And we know that there's going to be winners and there's going to be losers. Well, the dead people, I guess you count them as losers. And this isn't fake news. This is science. This is documented stuff. We're kind of going backwards for health and human care. I urge everyone to write your board of supervisor here in Goochland County, and maybe other counties too. This is a big deal. Let's get data centers out of M1 zoning. Data centers are not light industrial, and they need expert siting management, expert civil engineers, energy engineers looking at how to balance the environment, the humans with the data industry. So that's all I've got. Tonight there's an informational meeting, and I'll put this link up too. There's an informational meeting at the Farm Bureau on West Creek Parkway. It's free, but you need to register for it, and it's online as well. But again, you also have to register for that. And I'll put the link in there, and that's tonight at 6:30, either in person or online. So that's just chapter 1 of my book of generators. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned.